Thank you all for tuning in. Old friends, and I see some new friends in here too. This is the original third seminar in the Columbia Yacht Club CASRA, North Sails Winter Series. I want to thank CASRA and Columbia Yacht Club for being involved in this. As a webinar, Jack and I talked about how to do this, and we thought we'd take the best direction we could do is take it in by hitting some specific topics to help you think about getting your boat ready for offshore one design, your bowsprit boat ready for getting for offshore one design racing this summer. In 45 minutes, we'll be touching on spring boat setup, rig setup, some boat handling and trim. Jack is joining us right now, and Jack, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me. My name's Jack Orr. I'm from North Sails in Milford, Connecticut. I'm the class leader for the J109 program for North Sails. I'm also the offshore one design coordinator, so it's great to be able to get out and talk about all these different classes. So why don't we go ahead and get started? And as Keith outlined, Al Terhune already did a pretty nice tactics seminar for the Chicago group, so I'm not really going to cover that. I think right now, but where we are in the world, and most people can't or won't get their boats in the water for a little bit here in the next few weeks. So this is a perfect time to really do a little bit of a back to basics, talking about getting the boat ready to go sailing, to get yourself in the right mind frame, and think about all the little things on the boat that you can get ready. And these are the kinds of things that essentially everybody thinks they've got done, but probably you've only got about 6 out of 10 things done. And the really good thing about this is that once you do it and you start to practice getting all of these things set up, they're set up just like preparing a boat for a big offshore race, like say the Bermuda race. You go through this giant safety checklist, but once you've done it, you've done it. And so you can just keep refining it and adding to it, and that it only makes things better. So
Jack, I see you added a new thing to the North U pyramid.
Right. Yeah. Bill Gladstone nicely loaned me his graphic from North U, and his doesn't include preparation, but I think preparation is really key, especially in these offshore sprit boats. And it doesn't matter if you're a one design sailor, even if you're a handicap sailor. Even a lot of these things apply to anybody with any kind of handicap or keel boat for sailing handicap. Anyway, yeah, so I added preparation at the bottom because I think once you get that done, then all of the steps up above that, you don't have to really be thinking about what's going on inside the boat. You can easily find settings and make sure things are set up so that you won't be worrying about the little minutia going on inside the boat. You can look around, look outside the boat, and think about the big picture at the top of the pyramid to hopefully help you win races a little bit more consistently. Getting the sailboat through the water is basically the sail forces pushing against the mass of the boat and friction of the water. So friction of the water is a pretty big part of the equation. I'm not an engineer or somebody that physics major, but I do know that drag is bad. The boat on the bottom is a race boat that was sitting in a mooring up in Newport, a 40-foot race boat. If you got this slideshow, unfortunately, you can't see how fuzzy it is, but it's absolutely fuzzy with some shells growing on it. We all know that's slow, but also just little things like these pink hull. That was pictures taken of a J109 that came out of the water 3 weeks after the season ended, and 4 weeks after the North American Regatta. And the boat sailed the North American Regatta with the bottom in this condition. So needless to say, this person was middle of the pack at best. This is Keith's submission.
Well, it's funny because this is one of my good friends always used to tell me, if you're going to spend 10 grand on your boat, put 9 of it in the bottom, and then get another 10 grand for sales.
Or maybe 20.
Or 20. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, this is what we aspire to. Obviously, I think this boat was actually prepped like this, or did it come from the factory like this?
This was a repaint on this boat.
Wow.
Yeah. I think this was at Crowley's too. Yeah.
Well, that's gorgeous. We could all would love to have that. Weight, yeah, we all get it. These are multi-purpose boats. They cruise, they party, everything else, as well as doing sailboat racing. But man, you got to get get the extra weight out of the boat when you're ready to do some serious racing. And I wish I had a picture of somebody taking out the 5 cases of rum and beer and so on. But so I had the air conditioner picture instead, which is just as effective. So anyway, this is a basic one, and a lot of people don't really think about it too much, but you do have to think about it when you're going to do a serious race. And even just Wednesday night racing in light air, it's a good idea to do this. And so go through the boat, take out the extra stuff, and the class rules, they'll tell you if you can take out doors, cushions, tables, and plenty of people do that. Check your rules, see what you can leave on and take off. There's usually a list whenever you do a big regatta of safety equipment that has to be on the boat. That has to be on the boat. And then the extra stuff, don't bring it along. But the weight that you do have, get it in the middle of the boat, away from the ends, so that basically the boat sits evenly in the water. A lot of people leave their anchors and chains in the bow. You'd be surprised. Get it in the middle of the boat. Guys with outboard motors, some guys make brackets to go on their mast to hook their outboard motor on when they're sailing around. So this is something that everybody thinks about, but rarely do when you actually go out for even a good weekend race. Keith, any comment on that?
Yeah, I sailing in the early 80s on the East Coast, there was I sailed with a somewhat famous sailor who once told me, if you're not going to eat it, drink it, wear it, or use it, don't bring it. So
there you go.
Yeah, that's a good rule of thumb basically for just about anybody. There's always the exception, of course, for the Mac, where you want to bring just a little bit more than you're going to need. So as far as eating and drinking, eating.
Yeah. Yeah, in the transatlantic race, we actually had Coca-Colas stashed throughout the boat.
Under the floorboards?
In the bilge, ready to come out. So anyway, it's another, that's the mass of the boat. We've covered that, the friction on the water. Next thing is basic rig setup. This is the time to take a look at it, because things like if you have a roller furler on your forestay, it's not easily adjustable. So now is the time to think about where you want to have that set. And also the butt of the mast. Those two things are really hard to change once the mast gets in and you're actively sailing. In the Northeast here, we have a lot of boats on moorings, so it's a little bit scary to go out and detach your headstay and try to mess with the forestay, drifting around with some current, and, bouncing the boat around and so on. And then obviously the butt is hard to adjust at any time. So anyway, so what, the basics of rig tuning, why do we do it? Well, we do it because we want to come up with an easy way so that we can have that forestay set at the proper length, so that it balances against the backstay. And when you pull on the backstay, you're getting enough forestay tension without over bending the mast and making the main too flat. And vice versa. Like when you ease the backstay, you don't want too much sag in the headstay. So things that affect the bend are the mast butt, and that is actually a lever that's where the mast goes through the deck. It's going to turn around how the angle is coming from the butt. So if the mast was perfectly straight sitting in the boat and you pulled on the backstay, it would bend evenly. But a lot of times the mast, if you want to have a certain amount of angle in the mast for rake, which the rake helps balance the boat by moving the center of effort of the sail plan aft over the keel. And the rake affects the amount of helm that you feel. If you want more helm, you rake it back. If you want less helm, you rake it forward. When you want to rake the mast, if the butt is in the wrong spot, you can overbend the mast. Or you could have an even worse problem in some cases, where if the mast is too far forward and then you try to bend the mast, it won't bend. So, or it'll bend unevenly. So anyway, the purpose of the tuning guide from our point of view when we're writing it is just to balance all those forces so that essentially you're getting the right amount of bend in the mast when you pull on the backstay, so that it tensions the forestay as much as you can to the right amount as well. Does that sound pretty good to you, Keith?
Yeah. Let's talk about the shrouds a little bit.
Yeah, so shrouds are the next thing. What do the shrouds do? Well, the cap shroud, or the V1, the top shroud, that shroud basically tensions against the forestay, the headstay, and it bends the mast. So if you went back to that picture, just the same as pulling on the backstay, the top shroud pulls the top of the mast back, and also pulls against the forestay, like I said. And then the diagonals, they basically keep this mast in column side to side, but they also can control the amount that the mast bends when you do pull on the backstay. So those are as important, but on these J boats where you can't really tension your headstay, change the tension on your headstay, this is why we've had to develop tuning guides, because with swept back spreaders and not an easily adjustable forestay, the shrouds are really the only way to sort of adjust the mast without just having the backstay be the only thing that you can move. Now boats, there are some Sprit boats out there that are older ones that might have inline spreader rigs. They're pretty rare. Or if you're a guy that's changed your boat to a Sprit, obviously it's not the same dynamic as this. And inline spreader rigs, you tend to just want to keep the mast straight with the shrouds, and keep the mast in column, and maybe even you might soften it up just to create some sag in the mast for light air. But in general, you're going to tension the forestay and the backstay to control the bend of the mast. So how does that affect the sails? Well, the saggier you make the rig, if you make the forestay long, that'll sag the forestay, which means the jib will be fuller, like the blue outline. And if you tighten the forestay, it'll pull the whole luff forward, pull the luff straighter, and pull the whole sail in and make it flatter. So if the forestay's obviously too loose or too tight, you can get the sail not to achieve the sail shape that you want. And then the main, the same kind of thing you can do. It's the opposite though, because the more the mast bends, the flatter the main gets. So that's why it's important that the two balance against each other. So you don't have too much mast bend versus too much sag on the, and then you'll have one sail out of balance with the other.
Hey, Jack, let's go into a little bit more about settings and where we get those settings from.
All right. So
as far as thanks.
Yeah. So the first thing you want to do, well, let's just go back to sort of prepping the mast. We'll go to the settings later, but first thing you want to do is get the mast. When you put the mast in the boat, get the butt in the right place, in a recommended place, or marked from a previous time that you've used the boat and you had it in there, that it's in the right spot. And then also the forestay, have it set to the right length. And that would be in a tuning guide for most of these J boats or from your experience. But get the mast in the boat, center the tip. Using the main halyard is usually the best method, since it goes all the way to the top of the mast. And most of these boats, the main halyard is in the center of the mast, so it's a little bit easier you're certain that the halyard or your measuring tape is in the center. And then you measure from side to side, picking a spot on the shroud base or someplace on the deck that you know is somewhat equal from side to side.
Jack, I usually use a 25-pound fish scale when I do this, and I jam it down into the chain plates.
Okay, that makes sense, because there's always a little bit of residual springiness in the halyard.
Right. Also, if there's a little bit of breeze, then
right.
You have the same amount of pressure on both sides, and you're really not measuring anything with the fish scale. You're just trying to get it both at like 15 pounds on each side. And when you get it at that, it's dead center. So
right, and then you take the mark from side to side. You've made a mark on the halyard where one shroud is, and then you're one chain plate, and you move it to the other.
Yep.
So anyway, once you get the tip centered, there's lots of methods for doing that, like I said, and then get the diagonal shrouds tensioned so that the mast is in the center and it's in a straight line. And typically you can sight up the groove. I've heard of people using lasers and so on, but probably you're never going to get it that exact. But get the mast in column. Now, of course, when you go sailing, this is all going to load up and change slightly. So this is only the first step of the dock tune, and it gets you in the ballpark so that when you do go sailing, you can do the fine tune. So this kind of goes back to Keith's question, and that was where do we get these settings? Well, here's a sample tuning guide from the J109, and the first thing you do is you make sure you find out where the butt ought to be and what the headstay length ought to be. And in the case of the J109, we use a method where we swing a jib halyard out from the band at the boom on the mast and swing it out to the forestay and make a mark. And that arc is basically should be constant, so that if the headstay is longer or shorter, that mark will be higher or lower compared to the deck. So we have measurements that we've determined on most boats. It's pretty close. And so use that. J105s and some other boats, you might have to actually hoist a guy up and measure the forestay. But this is an important thing to do at the beginning of the season and to get it set ahead of time. So once you have the butt and the forestay in the right place, then you can start to look at the tuning. And in the adjustment section, you can see we sort of have an easy 3-step up and down section. And the base setting is where you should start with, obviously. And so using a loose gauge, you can get it pretty darn close. And if everything is straight, then you can go to the next step of starting to adjust it when you actually go sailing.
Right, Jack. I think the next slide is about recording settings.
Yes.
And I think that this is where what you were talking about. If you do this page, start with tuning guide, and you go to the next step, which is actually recording your settings and actually making settings that work best on your boat for the way you're sailing it, so you can optimize the boat. That's probably the next step up from just the basic tuning guide.
Right. And this is what you do at the dock to start with, and then you're going to fine tune, because this is a guide, not the absolute Bible, right? Because in Chicago, you're going to have light air with really flat water and weird puffs, maybe. Or when you do get breeze, you don't get quite as many waves as you do, say, in San Diego. In San Diego, things are a little, there's a swell built in light air. And so this guide will get you in the starting point, but you're going to probably find that in your particular area and your particular boat, like maybe, all the J109s, for example, they're getting on 15 years old, and maybe they're not as stiff as they were when they were brand new. So this is something that you're going to work on yourself to build the best matrix over time.
Basically creating your own Bible.
Right. And that's what everybody should be doing. And that's what the really good guys do, obviously. Mm-hmm. So anyway, with most tuning guides from North Sails, there's usually a sheet added on to the printout where you can, basically make a record as many settings as you can. Now, another sort of quick note on shroud tension. Once you get the thing to the tension, once you get the rig to the tensions in the tuning guide, you can use the loose gauge. That gets you in the ballpark. But to actually repeat the sort of exact shroud tensions, you're not going to be able to do that with a loose gauge. It's just going to get you to the starting point. And the best way to do it is to actually measure the turnbuckles. And a micrometer is really the best method to do that, or some kind of caliper, measuring caliper. You measure the gap and then write those dimensions down, because that'll get you to within a thread, typically, of where you were before. If you do it with the loose gauge, there's a lot of things that can sort of affect it. The wind can affect, just the force of the wind on the rig can affect the tensions on the shrouds. So use the loose gauge to get yourself in the close proximity to where you want to be, and then do the fine tuning, sort of keeping tracks of turns from a micrometer measurement.
Right.
Another thing that people don't do is they don't, a lot of times, especially with one design boats, because the opinion is that, well, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to go sailing and I'm going to see pretty quickly if I'm not fast or not. So, or if I'm not being able to point or whatever. And they've kind of lost sight of what their targets are. Like, if you know what your target is and you know what angle you're supposed to be sailing at, if you're not going the right speed, then you can limit the amount of variables to figure out why you aren't going as fast. Or sometimes you'll find out you're going faster, in which case then you do want to definitely record where you are with the rig and your trim and so on, so that you can get back to that spot. This particular chart I made up for J109s with the regular class chute. It has a lot of information on it, probably more information than you need. But the sort of the important ones to look at here are the heel, which is something that people don't look at that much. They can feel it when the boat's heeled a lot, but they don't ever try to quantify it. And quantifying it's important. And you can see from the polars that you probably, even in 20 knots of wind, you don't want to be much over 20 degrees of heel. So these are good things to look at. Another one is jibe angles. People don't typically write that down or have that on deck to see, because that's for your tactician. It's a good way to judge across the wind range what angle you should be on the other jibe. And then you can also sort of tell when it makes it easier to tell if you're on the favored jibe.
Jack, on some of the offshore boats that I've raced on, we actually add the sail selection on there too. So,
Yep, you can definitely do that. This one is just a rough one with just the VPP output. But
do you have this to share after for?
Yeah, absolutely. If
109
anybody wants to email me, I can pass it on. But
Do you have
I've
it with
also
the 120, the 120 meter square?
Yeah, I have one of the 120 as well.
Oh, okay, great.
Right. And I also sort of made a simplified one here that has the sails added, and then sort of simplifies it down to the sort of things that you need to look at actually. If I was sailing the boat myself, the numbers that I'd want to have on deck so that you could see what your targets are. And here's another case. This is from a Swan 42 at a Grand Prix event. And the crew jumps from boat to boat, or maybe it's not their boat. So, and they can't just write on the deck. So they made sticky back chart that includes, you can see upwind sail selection on the left, in the middle, the targets. And then on the right, there's actually another downwind sail selection chart. So like in this case, these boats might be doing some random legs in the racing, and so they have their reaching sails added in, as well as just their normal upwind downwind buoy racing sails. So even this is a simple case of a really good crew. If they don't have the information in front of them, they're very uncomfortable. All right, so there's my simplified chart. Another one here, this is the basic thing, right?
Who is that guy?
Yeah, it's my cousin. Anyway, you can't use your instruments and so on if they're not accurate. Now, we do have some weird times in the spring, especially in New England and Long Island Sound, where, it might be 70 degrees air temperature and the water temperature is still only 50. And so you get lots of boundaries in the wind. So the instruments aren't always going to tell you the truth. And so your polars it's going to throw off what your targets are. But in general, if you should get your instruments tuned, make sure that your speedo is clear and there's no barnacles on the speedo, or there's a barnacles in front of the speedo. It happens all the time. People get thrown out of whack because basically their instruments aren't telling them what their speed should be, and then they can't tell if they're going fast or slow. This goes along the line of what we were talking about before. Make sure not only do you keep measurements of your shrouds, but make marks for halyard tensions, backstay adjustment, your car on your jib track. I mean, so many boats I go out there and I see they're just pristine with no marks on them whatsoever. And it's surprising that they can get around the course just visually without having some kind of mark so they can go back to the same spot.
I kind of think that anything that's going through a block needs to be marked. It's if it's a control line or whatever, you just mark everything.
Right. And then Another one that people forget is a level gauge. Like every boat I go on, I almost want to just buy 15 of them and then take them on every boat with me, or I make my own that I can stick on, because a lot of people, they think they can sort of feel how much heel they have, and then they never realize how much heel the boat's actually heeling. So something that even is easily visual as this, and they don't cost much. They're maybe $20 at the most, and it's probably $20 well spent. So it's worth doing. Some instruments have them built in, and then they actually have that built in with the targets, which is pretty cool, but most sort of J boats don't have that. Just get the level gauge, put it right in the companionway, right in the middle, and everybody can see the main trimmer, and the helmsman can see how much helm you have, how much the boat is heeling. And then once you sort of have all those things marked, you can build something like this, which is essentially a spreadsheet, which has the tuning information in it, but it also has some trim marks, inhauler angles or distances, where the traveler car is up and down. All those things can sort of be written down as a reference. So, I mean, how many of these boats have the same crew from week to week, Keith, would you say?
I think most of them are. Most of the boats in Chicago are pretty well crewed up with the same crew. We'll get into that later. So,
okay. So anyway, if you're especially one of those guys that has a crew that's changing all the time, which in New England we have that quite a lot, because it's just hard for people to get out there on a consistent basis on the same boat. And having this as a reference, then the owner, the skipper can talk to his mainsail trimmer, talk to his jib trimmers, and make sure that they're consistently trimming the boat the same way. Here's a sample from an actual regatta that we did, a Cedar Point One Design regatta a couple years ago. Andreas Josenhans was out coaching, and he took these pictures, and this is only 6 of them. There were more offenders, and a mark on the halyard would solve this problem. 4 to 6 inches short on the main on over half of the fleet. Here's another useful mark. Put marks on the wheel or somehow on the deck with your tiller, to keep track of the center line, so you're right on the center, and 4 degrees on each side of that. More than 4 degrees, you're starting to create drag with the rudder, as opposed to keeping the boat going in a straight line. So it's a good idea to have marks on each side. And this is a visual cue for the mainsail trimmer as well, to how the boat is balancing. If the helmsman's consistently got outside of the marks, then you're not driving in a straight line as well as you should be. Mark your spreaders. They don't have to be marked exactly where the sail trims. It's just a relative spot, so that it's easy for the trimmer to see that he's in the same spot relative to the marks. The right-hand picture shows inhauler. On a J109, we sort of figured out you would never inhaul it this far, but have some marks inside of the rail so that you can get the clue back to the same spot consistently.
Again, repeatable settings to improve your results.
Absolutely. And then, Keith's, when Keith's dog comes on the boat, you make sure that he knows what all of those numbers mean. And you can see this boat actually has really nicely marked out for the jib car. Another just sort of quick note, just in the rigging, something that's easy to do nowadays. Get rid of your metal J-locks if you can. Don't use knots. especially if you have inhaulers. You know, almost all the J boats have inhaulers now, except for maybe the J105. Get some soft shackles or put T-rings on the clews of your jibs so that you don't have something hard and fat or metal banging against the rig, banging against the shrouds. And then, of course, your inhaul fair lead, typically if you have knots, you can't get the clue down as far as you want.
The T-rings can also have covers on them so that, like
Right,
Jack
this is
said,
one that's exposed so that you can see
Right.
how the loop works on it.
Right.
But we can also put covers on them so that it makes the thing nice and smooth. And it actually protects the mast where the thing bangs across. All right, so that's sort of the preparation part of it, and you guys can always send us questions about that. And like I said, it's a little bit basic, and maybe it's frustrating for some people to hear it over and over, but if you don't hear it over and over, you just got to reinforce it because, like I said, everybody maybe thinks that they're doing 9 out of the 10 things, and they're probably only doing about 7 or 6. So thank you for your patience. So on to the next thing, sail handling and balance of the boat. So we'll go just to do a quick basic thing. We've only got about 10 minutes left, so we'll quickly go through the basics of most of these J boats, how they like to sail. Keep the boat flat, probably the most important thing upwind with J boats is they are racer cruiser boats with racer cruiser keels. They're not race keels like a custom built boat. So, and they try to keep them as short as they can so that people can use the boats as versatilely as they want. If they want to go cruising and they've got this giant keel, clearly they're not going to be able to go certain places. So with the keel the way it is, the lengths that you have and sort of the weight of the keel versus the weight of the boat, it's really critical that the blade be in the right spot. Also, the design of the boat, you want to sit on certain lines so that you have the right amount of wetted surface as well. In this picture, you can see the boat's actually heeled at about 21 degrees. And if you see in my text there on the left, I believe it was Andreas that had this number that he gave me, and that's 17 degrees of heel subtracts 18% of keel depth from when the boat is straight. So if you think about that, it's like almost 20%, it's like taking a Sawzall and cutting 20% of the length of your keel off. So that's affecting not only the riding moment, but also the way that the foil is working as a dynamic foil in the water to help you go upwind. So like I said, going back to the marks on the wheel, you can see here in this picture that the main trimmer and the driver could see right away that even if they didn't notice the heel as much, that the wheel is turned too far. So probably in this case, if he centered the wheel back up, the boat would be headed a couple of degrees higher and probably flat and under 20 degrees. Now, if he has to sail this exact course, then he probably wants to just flatten the sails more than he has already. You can see everybody's already hiking, so you can't really get much more weight out. But he could probably put some more backstay tension on, maybe flatten out the outhaul a little bit more, or flatten out the jib so it spills a little more breeze and get the boat slightly flatter.
I don't know. I think we could get those guys off the rail a little bit further.
Yeah, well, they could definitely push out a little harder.
Next.
All right, then, sort of along the same line, we have the racing crew on the left, and then we have the social distancing crew on the right. One of my customers and I were laughing about that this morning, that how is he going to sail around with everybody 6 feet apart? you know, hopefully we'll have a vaccine so that we can all get a little bit closer someday, or, you know, this thing will pass by. But definitely the guys on the left are what we like. And we hope to get back to that as soon as we can, and make one guy in charge of it. Like, one guy should be, you know, whether it be a mast man or a bow man or somebody who's a crew boss, just take a look at how much the boat is heeling, where the main trimmer can sort of let everybody on the rail know that, you know, we're heeling too much. Can everybody get a little further out? On a lot of good boats, you know, and maybe when you're tuning, before you're racing, yell at one of your tuning mates and ask them to make sure that the boat is balanced fore and aft. You don't have the bow digging in, or the bow sticking out of the water, with the crew in the right place. This is something that, you know, like all the good One Design guys do this, and all the big boat guys do this. They have somebody spot the boat and make sure that, you know, the boat's sitting in the water right. And, you know, if you go out, when you first go out sailing on a race, the first half hour, if, you know, some people consider it racing. So this would be one of the things on the checklist. Here's an example of a boat that you can see. This is not a good way to sail around, especially, you know, in light air, they've got weight to leeward, but they got so much weight in the back of the boat. You can actually see how much wake there is from the quarter of the stern.
It looks like they got 5 owners on there.
Yeah, right. And the bow is out of the water. This is not going to be fast. And you know, you're popping a wheelie, so to speak. Another sort of quick upwind note, if you're a J109 sailor, and, you know, we can talk about this for different classes, have different optimal settings. But with the J109, if you're sailing upwind, the way to have the inhauler set, in light air, where you're sailing a little bit fuller, you have the jib out a little bit, the lead's a little bit further forward, so the sail's fatter, I should say. It's got a little more shape in it. Then you're gonna have it a little bit outside of the rail. We figure about 9 degrees. And then as the wind increases, you get up to speed, everybody's hiking, you pull the thing in, and so it's just inside the rail. That'll get you about 8.5 to 9 or 8 degrees. And maybe in really flat water, you can go a little bit tighter than that, maybe up to 7. Typically, we found that 8 seems to be a pretty nice sweet spot. And then in heavy air, as it starts to increase again and you start to flatten out the foot, put some more backstay on, everybody's hiking hard, then you're going to start sliding that inhauler back out. And by the time you get to 20 knots, you're probably going to be all the way out to 13 degrees where the jib track is. So this is a question I get all the time, and this is something that everybody should do when they first go out. Get out on the water, get the jib out, start by setting the lead. Maybe you have a mark on the deck, you can start there, but make sure that the telltales are breaking evenly up, you know, bottom to top. And then that's a good place. That's where you start. And then as the conditions change, you know, it's lumpier, lighter, so on, you can move the lead to make the sail fatter in the, you know, fuller in the foot, tighter at the top, and so on, to change with the conditions. But always start by making sure that your telltales are breaking evenly. Now, if you have a huge amount of shear, you know, like I say, in the springtime in Long Island Sound, maybe it won't work exactly, because, you know, you could have, you know, 10 degrees or 15 degrees different wind angle at the top. It's not unheard of. So that rule might not totally apply for that, but it's, in general, that's what you should do. And so get the telltales breaking even. We work very hard to make sure that the sails, that the entry angles of the sails are even up and down, so that you can do just this. Mainsail trim, this is another thing, just the basics here. You know, you can come up with your own sail matrix, but in light air, you're going to have the backstay all the way off. You're going to be pulling the boom up high. You're going to trim so that the top telltale is typically flowing most of the time. And then as the wind increases, you're going to start to flatten that out haul. By the time you get to 10 knots, you're probably going to have it pretty much all the way out at max, maybe by 11. But you still want to keep that boom on center line as much as you can. Because once you start dropping it, then the driver loses that bit of helm, and you want to have him to keep that helm so that he can keep going upwind. And then in heavy air, try to keep the traveler up as much as you can, because the more you ease the traveler down, and you really don't have a huge amount of range on any of these J boats, and once you get it down to the bottom, you sort of lose a bunch of mechanical advantage with the main sheet. So instead of just twisting the sail, the boom goes up at the same time. So to try to, in order to keep the boom higher, the technique that's proved best is to vang hard, have somebody play the vang. On most J109s or any of these J boats, they have the vang. Somebody can keep the vang in hand in case you have to ease it really quickly, you get a big puff. But have that vang on hard, and then you can play the twist. Just like in these pictures here, this is Dave Rossow with Loki, which is the national champion 3 times in a row. And you can see he has really good technique for keeping the boat. Doesn't have more than 20 degrees of heel. He's got the backstay on super hard. The main's just completely bladed out, and he's twisting it with the main sheet. And the vang is hard, and the traveler is not dumped all the way down. I bring that up because Keith told me that probably the #1 thing that he gets the questions in Chicago is about sailing in heavy air like that. Part of this process is having, and this is something that we can all work on all the time, the lines of communication, because the jib trimmer, the main trimmer, and the helmsman should be talking constantly about where the sails are. So, and the driver should be telling them how he wants to keep the boat on its lines. And the same with the spinnaker trimmer. All these guys should be talking all the time. And the tactician can be involved too, maybe telling where he wants the helmsman to go. But in general, the trimmers and the helmsman should have a constant communication. And then downwind, you probably have another person. You can see this person on the right with the arrow. They're looking back and spotting the wind and letting everyone know about the puffs and the lulls. And on a J boat, this seems to work best with having somebody actually up on the cabin pushing the boom out. This gets some weight in the middle of the boat near the mast, but it also, most of the spinnakers for these class sails are designed so that you don't have a tweaker, and the boom actually acts as a tweaker. And our sail designers know this, and they design the sails so that when the wind increases and you're sailing deeper angles and the sail's out there floating as far as you can to windward, that the sheet's actually being twinged down by the boom. But also, like I said, this is a good way to have somebody looking back, watching your competition and what the puffs are doing. Here's another sort of light air example. Get the dogs in the house, get the weight down low, right down by the mast, and then you don't have, it'd be nice if we could blow this picture up a little bit more. You can see that the actual transom is completely out of the water here. And so that's just less drag. Tack line, that's sort of the big question. I'm kind of going fast here, I'm sorry, because we're getting to the end of our time. But the big, last big one that I'm going to talk about is the tack line on the asymmetric, because that's probably the #1 question I get. In light air, have the tack down close to the end of the Sprit. That gets the luff straight, gets the sail shape to be more of a tight winded shape, closer to like a Genoa shape, and allows the, because you're sailing tighter angles in general. It just makes the sail work more efficiently that way. Just like on a jib, if you have the halyard real loose or you have the headstay real loose, then the luff sags a bunch and you can't sail the angle as effectively. As the breeze increases, and the sails are designed, most of these sails are undersized compared to what they could be if you could make them as big as you wanted. But the class sizes actually work well with easing the tack line up. So when you ease that tack line up as the breeze increases, the sail will float out and actually go to weather so that you can sail deeper without the sail falling behind the spinnaker falling behind the mainsail. And the projection, you'll see a huge amount of projection on the sail. The luff will actually fly right out to windward with the tack up. If you pull that tack too tight, then it just folds over and you're not getting that area working for you. Now, when you get to really heavy air and maybe you have the tack up, pulpit height, when you start to get close to 20 and, it gets a little bit rougher and harder for the driver, you might want to just snug the tack down just a little bit back in, because then the tack will be floating around a little bit too much and hard to keep under the sail. So just like everything else, you sort of got to gauge it by what the sea condition is as well as the wind condition. But in general, you'll if you imagine the tack of the sail as if you look at the angle of it, when it's in reaching conditions or VMG conditions, the sail's going to make sort of an L, where the one side of the L is going straight up and down. And then as the wind increases, you're going to ease that tack up until eventually the tack angle becomes a V instead of an L. And then the sort of straight up and down vector is sort of splitting the V. So I guess anything you want to add to that, Keith?
No, this is great. I kind of cut out because I didn't want to, we're running out of time, so I didn't want to make it any longer. But I think we'll hand it over to Louisa and wrap it up. And if you have any questions, go ahead and send them to Louisa, or you can email Jack or I, and we'll get back to you quickly with answers.
Yeah, and this was a little bit general. We get it. It's basic, and we have a wide audience of people that we're trying to address. So I'm sorry if you didn't get some more of the sort of advanced master techniques, but we can always do those later. People can ask questions, and then, like I say, go to the North Sails YouTube channel. You'll find lots of good, very good, excellent presentations that have been done so far, different one design ones. I think the J70 one would be super useful for any of these classes.
Yeah, it's a 2-part series for the J70s. That's a really, really good seminar. The other thing is, if you're a J109 owner and you want us to continue this, go ahead and email me. We might do prior to the J109 North Americans, we're going to do Jack and I are going to do a quick performance thing. So, all right.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Keith, for setting this up. Thank everybody for their help, and thanks for attending. We'd love to see you out on the water, and yeah, feel free to shoot us emails. Our emails are easy. Give us a shout, and we'll get back to you, hopefully to answer any of your more detailed questions.
Thanks, fellow sailors.
Yeah, if you guys have any questions, we have time for 1 or 2, so you can drop them in the chat right now if you'd like. We have one person, Kevin Marks, is asking for some J88 specific tips if you guys have them quickly.
Well, thanks, Kevin. Kevin, I sailed with him in the North Americans last year. Thanks for attending. I think Kevin, J88 specific things. I think we might try to do a J88 specific one, but in your case, the boat's a little bit easier to adjust some of the adjustments, and then obviously the shrouds are very hard to adjust with them being so close to the stanchion base. So I think Kevin, the first thing you should do is probably go back and look at that J70. Go online and look at that, and then we can talk later. I have your number, so I'll give you a call. But with J88s, it's pretty much the same basic things as all of these. And if you looked at the polars, it's almost exactly the same as the 111 or the 109, and they're very similar in the way they sail. So let's just, except you have a tiller. So except for that, we'll just sort of leave it at that.
Alrighty, well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Keith and Jack. And as they both said, check out our YouTube page for more webinars.
Thanks.
All right, thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you.